That's terrible. I've never sat on a range once and thought, I hope I pull it. Yeah. But then we get out on a golf course, and by definition, it's a hard shot. That's why we're aiming away from the pin, and then you're putting a wishy-washy, non-committed swing on it.
So what's the best tip for somebody that's shanking it? I can tell them to get their butt back on the ball, or I can tell them to hit the toe. External cues will work better. Trying to hit the toe works better.
That was a good one. You have to do it again.
All right, we are here in the Performance Center. What's the word?
Yeah, Learning Center at Interlochen. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're gonna do it again. All right, that's another good one. We are here in the Performance Center here at Interlochen Country Club with Luke and Scott, and we are talking block and random practice. Luke, you kick us off with, give us like the 30-second rundown if people don't know.
Yeah, so block practice is essentially doing the same thing over and over, and you're trying to essentially groove it. And the literature will generally say that variable practice is better, especially if you're trying to train for a context that you may use later. So variable practice means like switching shots. You're going to do different numbers, you might do different targets, you might change clubs, you might do different shapes. It's all about varying up your practice. And I think there's applications of both. What I typically would do is block practice, more technique breakdown, kind of doing essentially 7 irons over and over while you work on mechanics. Variable might be better for preparing for tournaments where you need context. But there's different ways and there's different perspectives. Scott and I get into it a little bit, which is great, about the value of both. So
let's stereotype it. You're like the guy, like the perception could be, we should be here and we're going to groove a 2-yard fade that you're going to hit over and over again.
I am Mr. Block Practice. Oh, 100%.
Okay,
I'm Mr. Block Practice Death. And the reason I am is because, first of all, as we can see right here, my shot pattern, I'm trying to hit exclusively cuts. Now, the left side of my shot pattern is pretty much a straight ball. Actually, this may be turned even just a little bit left. But the biggest thing you have to eliminate in golf is the double cross. Like, that is the cardinal sin of all golf. It reigns supreme. And so I have just got a way where I can feel the weight of the face, and it's hard to get the weight on the other side of the face. Now, talking about shot shape, because that's obviously what we just brought up, I'm not quite as dogmatic about it with irons because we can alter the ball position around. So I can move the ball position back, and that helps move my path to the right, which allows me to play a draw easier. So I don't even have to change my swing. I'm just changing my ball position, and my feels don't really change. But the main thing, like the literature, it talks about, you know, a batter, like they do better with taking live pitch versus just off a tee. And the reason I feel like most of the literature, when they take it from other studies and try to apply it to golf, is just because golf is the only sport that there's not defense. There's no shared ball. I can't do anything to impact your play. I get it, like hitting a baseball off of a tee, like that's not ideal, but I get to start all of this myself. And again, I'm not as dogmatic about it with the irons. I'm really dogmatic about it with the driver because, sorry Frankie from Barstool, I'm about to throw you under the bus here, but he's a 10 handicap. And when I went out and did my little fixing Frankie thing with him, his driver ball position was just all over the place. And sometimes he's kind of aimed this way, sometimes. So he can hit a good shot, and literally it could go into the right trees just because he wasn't even lined up right. So with the driver specifically, I'm just a very big proponent that I need the ball to be in the exact same spot relative to my body every single time. Because just moving that thing around changes the loft, changes everything. But as much as anything, I need to get good at getting in here, looking downfield, and being set up square to my target, whatever that might be, and square whatever that might be. You might be a guy that stands open, you might be a guy that stands closed. It just needs to be the same every time. And I just don't think people are good enough at that. The idea of we need to introduce variability because that's how the body reprograms. I totally get it. I'm just a believer that even as a pretty good golfer, there's enough variability in my swing already that the brain is already having to relearn. That's just my thoughts.
So actually, we're actually not that far off. Even though, like, when we get into these forums, we might sound a million miles off. Like, I'm a big believer in, like, don't change more than you need to change for the shot. So for I call it basically like ball position and changing shapes. Like I would say, the golf club is attached to your left groin, and as you rotate to hit a fade, you're going like this. The ball position relative to your feet has not changed, because as soon as I start doing this and this, now the ball position's way back. It changes my low point, everything else different. So for me, the cut goes this way, and then I would argue just learn to open the face about 2 degrees. It's between essentially your target and your path, and essentially where your feet are aimed, because your feet are aimed left, and that's essentially your fade setup. The face is a couple degrees open, you swing your club. Now, to your point, the center mass feels different when you open the face. And that is where, especially when you're talking about moving the center mass way behind the head on a driver, a modern driver, there are some big differences there. So I get that, and I think my point would be that I teach golf from a building skills perspective. From age 10 to 16 or 18, I really want kids to be really good at shaping it, because if you can shape it really well, you can also fix it really well, and you have all the shots you need to. How often on the golf course do you actually need to shape it? It's not that common, right?
Well, and again, that's where I try to be as objective as possible by saying, like, I don't teach anyone but tour players because I don't teach mechanics. So I literally only have conversations about mechanics. How do y'all do this?
Right.
Y'all, I'm from Texas. I'm up here in Minnesota. I feel like it's roasted for that. But how do y'all do this? And most of them, they're doing it by altering ball position.
Yeah.
And I get it. Like even Zalatoris, you know, the way he was growing up, he would just middle of the backswing. David Price would say, draw. And he'd have to change to hit a draw, or he'd have to change to hit a fade. Now, again, we could get into the neurons and how that's even working. Maybe he was actually doing it correctly, but then, you know, there's other people that talk about like, well, I want to be able to move the ball around on the face. I want to be able to hit it on the toe, on the heel. Like that's a skill acquisition thing. And I'm like, well, can't you just try to hit it in the center every time? Like,
that's a great example.
I don't even get that.
You don't teach, so like I have people that continue to shank it. So what's the best tip for somebody that's shanking it? I can tell them to get their butt back on the ball, or I can tell them to hit the toe. External cues will work better. Trying to hit the toe works better. Fortunately, you don't have to deal with that.
Like I say, that's where I try to be objective. Like I only fortunately work with players who are pretty darn good to begin with.
Yeah.
And so like they can just kind of do it. But again, like myself, you know, I'm 49. When I was playing professionally back in the late 90s, I would try to get in there to hit a draw, and I would try to close the face, and I would try to change my path, you know, without even knowing those
without
terms.
changing your setup.
Without changing my setup. And, it's
that's
just
a disaster to me.
That's a disaster.
Yeah.
Once you understand that I'm going to hit a fade with the club, my body lines, everything pointed left of the target, and then my path just needs to be further left than that. And then the draw is the same thing. It's actually interesting for me and for, again, a number of tour players that I know. When they draw it, they put it back and they actually open their stance. I don't even have a clue why that would be.
Yeah, I mean,
the more I have to draw it, the more I actually open my stance.
Well, they're moving it way back and trying to hit a low draw.
Yeah.
Because the path is very much more inside out when you play it back. But setup should be the key. You shouldn't have to do too much if it's done properly.
Well, and again, that's the whole deal. Is I'm not going to do it right now because I would actually hurt myself. But I did it one time. I was arguing with another instructor about this idea of feeling the face and the weight and everything. Again, this is before we had the right terminology. And I literally took a 6-iron. I addressed it like this, and I swung, and I hit a shot, and then I took the club face and I moved it 180 degrees the other direction, and I did it, and I hit the exact same shot. Now, I could not do that anymore after 2 elbow surgeries, but it was pretty comical because I'm like, I'm telling you, you can just, I don't know if you're just not good enough, but I can tell you where the weight is in relation to the face. And so for me even when I try to draw it, I don't change my grip at all. This is actually another thing that I do believe, I don't know if this is something y'all research or not. Oh, God, I gotta stop saying that. But with the driver, you know, I've got one guy that drives the ball really well that I work with, and he's got that thing, a super strong grip, it's up in his stance, and then he doesn't hit his irons as well. And I'm like, well, by the time you've moved it back in your stance, your arm is in a weird position. I'm a guy that super strong grip up in my stance, and then I get actually pretty weak with my irons as I move the ball back.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, your arm just doesn't feel the same.
Yeah.
And even if I take just the same relative to position as I move it back, the grip, I think it should weaken. And this is one thing I'm tinkering around with as I try to get my game back in shape. I'm really considering just having like literally 2 swings. One that's a driver that's just super strong and just like trying to hit it as hard as I can, and then one that's an iron that's super weak and back in my stance.
Mm-hmm.
So back to practice. What does practice mean to you? Or like when you're spending time out there, what are you trying to do?
I am trying to, obviously learn how to hit the ball well. I'm trying to figure out how to do the same shot literally every single time, and I'm trying as much as anything to learn how to center my shot pattern over my target. So right here, just eyeballing it, obviously I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 balls right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 or 7 balls left, 1 right on the center line. As you can see, the shot pattern is tilted long left to short right. Even as a fader, my left side of my shot pattern is where I just squared it more. So being able to just do that, I mean, a number of players, if they hit balls on the range, would have like, it would be like 80% right of their target. People are like, that's one question I get with Decade all the time is like, I mean, I'm hitting it pretty good, but like 75% of my balls are right.
You got a bias error you got to fix.
Just do the same thing, just aim a little further left. And this is where it's hard because aim, most people think of body lines as aim. I just think of aim as being the center of your shot pattern. We need to center our shot pattern better over the target. And again, I do think that's a skill. I mean, I really do, and I think most people aren't very good at it. This is back to block and random. I do believe the easiest way, not the only way, the easiest way to accomplish that when you're on a range without a TrackMan or a quad or whatever, is by just hitting at the same target and just paying attention. I mean, back to Zalatoris in 2014, the week before the Texas Amateur, we went out and we hit balls, and I was just wanting to illustrate to him, I was wanting to see, can you center your shot pattern over a target? And then I wanted to illustrate to him, look, dude, you just tried to hit that one right here. But there was a 50-50 chance you missed it left and right of it. Because what I really think one of the cardinal sins of players is they aim right, so the pin's on the left, we aim a little right, and then you kind of hope you pull it. That's terrible. I've never sat on a range once and thought, I hope I pull it.
Yeah.
But then we get out on a golf course, and by definition, it's a hard shot. That's why we're aiming away from the pin. And then you're putting a wishy-washy, non-committed swing on it.
Well, that's why Decade gives you a target to aim at. And so, like what I actually teach a lot of my players is when we're on the range, we're not aiming at pins that much. I'm going to pick out a pin, and I'm going to say hit it 10 feet left of that pin. And if you want to pick a tree in the background, that is your target. The target is not the pin, in my opinion.
So maybe you are mixing up block and random, because I know you do. There's testing involved, maybe your combines as well that you do, or are you just literally going out there?
I literally do just
doing this.
I swear,
So,
I put one alignment rod down,
Yeah.
and I hit every single club through the bag on the exact same target.
So where I can come from at a different angle is like if I don't have too many players that have a dispersion like this, but I do have some that are very good, and this is what they will do if I have the alignment rod down and they hit 20 shots, tight grouping. So then I'll give them this challenge. I'll say, all right, we're going to pick 3 different targets, and I'm going to keep the TrackMan on, and I'm going to move it every time. And we're going to have one target here, one target here, and one target here. But again, we're hitting just straight shots to a different target, but we're changing our aim every time. What happens? Dispersion gets wider.
Yep.
Right? So then the question is, well, is that good practice to make the dispersion wider? Yes, because that's what you get on the golf course, where like I literally have people where if they hit to the west, they don't hit as well because the sun is over there and they can't hit as well. So should I just go back to what's easy, or should I practice hard scenarios? And that's where all the research lends towards this idea of contextual interference. Make the task very hard in practice, not so hard that you can't learn, but hard enough that you're learning faster than you would where it's really easy.
Well, and see, that's where I agree with. Again, this is where I try to be objective, like, I don't have that problem. And so like I'm speaking anecdotally for me, but one of the main drills that we've got in the Decade app, the Moonwalker drill, which is the opposite of a ladder drill where you're trying to lag around the prior putt. You start at 30 feet and you lag it, and then you're trying to roll every putt 6 inches short of that all the way back to you. And the reason I did that is I've got a well putt mat at home, and you can't ladder around it because there's not enough room. And so I did that one time, and I just sucked at it. And I was like, oh, that was awful. I'm not doing that anymore. And then I sat down later on, and I'm like, well, you should be able to do that. I just kept on taking the same length stroke and decelling into it. But I definitely was like, well, if you're not good at this, you should be able to. It's the exact same thing, but the opposite of a ladder drill. And so then I started working on it. Now I'm pretty darn good at it, laddering it backwards. So like that, I totally agree with. Again, just in my experience, it's not something that I've had to battle.
Yeah, I think your case is a little interesting. Often about like when you see coaches enter the field like that were great players in a lot of different sports. They have so much knowledge and implicit ability, they don't even know that they don't need to train a different way. And some of those guys, like, they just get it done because they're skilled.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's
What's that? There's the 4 phases of learning, the ignorance,
Yeah.
ignorantly incompetent or something like that. And then the last one is unconsciously competent, where you just know what to do.
You're kind of in that range. That's where, like, you haven't had to think about it very much.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. Again, this is kind of like the one shape thing. There's been 2 things that have been blown out of proportion, probably on my own accord. But like the idea of shaping the driver one direction and block versus random practice, that initially started off solely as talking about driver.
Yeah.
And then the more and more that I became aware of this is what I'm doing, the more I really started applying the ideas to the rest of my game, and just the easier for me the entire game became. Right. So I mean, again, like, it's not something I was originally like setting out to think about or do, but it just kind of backed into it where I'm like, this is just so much easier. Again, like, I'm just not going to change my opinion on that with the driver. Like the driver, I do believe everyone, just because the ability to walk in to a ball, again, from the back and walk in. I have done this so many times that I know that, and then as I separate, I would love to know the variance of how much that ball position, because it's not to the millimeter.
But it's close.
I really wish there was a way I could figure that out, because I'm curious, because then Frankie was like, I mean, literally, it was probably like in a 6 or an 8 inch window that it could be.
Well, and that to me, that's
and like if you put me like here one time, I'm not going to hit it well. If you put it like, it's in the
1
same
inch of
spot.
ball position is the difference of missing right rough and left rough, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's huge. You
It's
have to
huge.
nail your ball position. So
It's huge.
I get that. And I think with the modern drivers, this is where we are in some agreement. With the modern drivers, if you're a fader of the golf ball, your driver is built to have just the right amount of spin, that it works for a fade and doesn't spin too much. So if you get a DJ or a Koepka and they're hitting fades all day, and now they have to draw one, that ball does not stay in the air. So then what do they have to do if they're literally going, I'm saying like Koepka,
10 at Augusta.
they're going like this, right, to do it. So the ball is not going to stay in the air, so what do? Now that's a giant variable that we don't need. And so therefore the case to have a 3-wood or a mini driver makes a ton of sense for those guys.
The best drivers of the golf ball, it's a short list. Rahm, Keith Mitchell, Rory. Keith is a guy I've worked with for a year and a half. And it's just he doesn't change anything. And so the Byron Nelson last year, number 9, was playing into about a 20-mile-an-hour wind. And he's told me, like, I don't change anything. And I'm curious, because I'm like, I don't either.
Yeah.
But like, dude, you're on tour. You're one of the best drivers of the golf ball. Like, I want to see it. I literally went and hid in the trees on number 9 at TPC Craig Ranch because I wanted to see him hit this shot over a little creek into a 20-mile-an-hour wind. And sure enough, man, that ball was teed up high, and he's just in there in his normal setup, and he just launched it straight up into the wind with a cut on a dog leg left into a 20-mile-an-hour wind. I'm like, wow. Even I would have like brought it down a little bit or something. One of the top 3 drivers of the golf ball on the planet literally didn't change anything. And again, that's where I do agree the fader is in a better spot. Again, I'm agnostic on which shape. DeChambeau draws it. I don't care which shape, but I just want you to do the same thing. I do think that fading the driver is easier. The ball position's up in your stance, path is exiting left. But then the reason I like it is I can just take my 3-wood, move it back in my stance because of the loft. Now I'm just hitting a low roasty draw, or my mini driver. I want to get that fact out there. Mini driver, team mini driver. Yeah. I mean, I just think that the driver should just be the same thing.
So I have a hunch for you, which I want to pitch to you, is that Scott and a lot of these guys have done their skill development in the past. And so now Scott isn't maybe developing those skills anymore. He's accessing. He's got the skill, right? So maybe there's something going on different. That's a hunch that I have about why we see practice vary.
I totally agree. And this is where, again, like the problem with all of this is I don't think you can prove the counterfactual. I just don't. Like, I'm not. That's where I'm saying, like, I can't prove I'm right. But I also don't think that you can prove.
It would be a very hard experiment to do. Now, like
you can.
Well, you could do it over time, but like we were looking at, I did a presentation yesterday on Dwight Howard when he's shooting free throws. Okay, so Dwight Howard, in practice, is right around 85% free throws. On the court, he's right around 46%. Okay, so what does he need to do? He needs to add context and difficulty. It's not shoot more free throws with block practice. It's actually vary it up, add pressure, practice more like Steve Nash. So Steve Nash practices free throws back in the day where it's like every 15 minutes his coach says, go shoot 2, and the whole team's watching you. And that's more variable practice, space practice, more of the contextual learning stuff. You hit the same shot all day long, and I believe what you do here is on the course. Some people are not like that. And so I walk them through the whole litany of basically like as soon as you change the setting, you get a different outcome. I got to make sure they practice in a lot of different settings, a lot of different skills, so that they can figure it out on the course.
I've always been, when people talk about like increasing the difficulty and nerves in practice, I've always been like, how do you do that? As I told you guys earlier, as I started doing the decade combines, I started realizing, you know what, this actually does gamify it a little bit. And I actually was speaking at the Baltimore PGA section a number of years ago, and I'm trying to think of the place kicker's name. It sucks because I actually played golf with him in the sun. I can't think of his name right now. But he said that he used to try to gamify practice so that way simulating, kicking a kick to win the Super Bowl like he did. And I was like, all right, dude, how do you do that? Because I don't buy it. I don't buy that you can get it anywhere close. He's like, I'll tell you exactly what I did. I had to kick a 42-yard field goal at the end of every single practice, and if I didn't make it, the whole team had to run a mile.
Wow.
He's like, you get Ray Lewis staring at you like, I'm tired. He's like, it wasn't quite like a game, but it was pretty darn close. The entire team is saying, And he didn't have to run the mile.
Yeah.
So even if he missed it, he just had to sit there and watch them run it.
Awesome.
And I think that's brilliant. It's a really hard thing to do, though.
Yeah.
On that note, everyone should go do a bunch of random practice, as we just learned based on
Totally.
And
Thanks,
block is useful at times,
And
especially
block
for
is-
mechanics,
That's
right?
correct. Definitely is. That was fun. Thanks, guys.
Absolutely.